Just in time, I'm Dr. Forrester. Are you ready for an adventure? We know that Chicago, or Chicago, has a remarkable history. The city became the center for development of the Midwestern region of the United States. From the time that Baptiste Point du Sable left the city in the late 1700s, through the 1820s, the Chicago area was the scene of many bloody battles. In 1795, the Northwest Indian War ended, but shortly afterward, the British attacked Fort Dearborn during the War of 1812. They burned the fort to the ground and captured or killed every American soldier. The fort was rebuilt in 1818, but was once again attacked. But this time, it was cholera that did the damage, and not the British. Like yellow fever, cholera is a deadly disease that is extremely contagious. Hundreds of people died at Fort Dearborn. In 1833, when the fighting had stopped and cholera was no longer an epidemic, the town of Chicago was formed. At that time, there were only about 300 residents of the town. Just 4 years later, in 1837, the city of Chicago was incorporated. This means the city legally became registered in the state and formed its own local government with its own mayor and town council. At this time, the city had grown to over 4,000 residents. 25 years later, the city's population had exploded to 400,000 people. Chicago was an ideal location. Farms spread across the fertile land surrounding the city. Farmers would come into town and sell their produce to merchants who would then load it onto large ships and sail back to customers in New York. To accommodate all the people moving into the region, a network of roads was built. Settlers and merchants could travel to Chicago and back home by land and by water across the Great Lakes. And a new form of transportation began bringing people to Chicago from the east and west: railroads. By 1850, more than 30 rail lines led to Chicago, and all of them brought people to the city. By 1850, Chicago was the fastest growing city in America. Factories were built, warehouses grew up around the docks where merchandise was held until it could be shipped to other locations. Companies from all over the country shipped their products from Chicago warehouses. Chicago built one of the first major sewer systems in the country. The country had never seen such a gigantic engineering project. At the rate of growth it was experiencing, it seemed Chicago would soon overtake Philadelphia and perhaps challenge New York City as the biggest urban area in the country. That is, until 1871. On Sunday evening, October 8th, a small barn caught fire. As the legend goes, a woman's cow kicked over a kerosene lamp and set the barn ablaze. However, there has never been proof of the cause of the fire. Because almost all the buildings in Chicago were made of wood, the fire spread quickly and burned out of control for 3 full days. The scale of this disaster was unimaginable. 300 people died in the fire. 18,000 buildings were burned, and nearly 90,000 people were left homeless. An area of nearly 3 square miles had been burned to the ground. The Great Chicago Fire of 1871 is regarded as one of the greatest American disasters of the 19th century. Because so many businesses had been located in Chicago, businessmen began rebuilding their factories and warehouses almost immediately after the last fire was extinguished. Within days, donations of money, food, clothing, and even furniture began pouring into the city from all over the nation. They say that some good can come from almost every bad situation, and Chicago is a case in point. Because of the fire, new buildings in the country were being constructed with fireproof materials. Many businesses banned people from smoking. Chicago's Palmer House Hotel was rebuilt on a lot across the street from its original location. When it opened, the hotel was advertised as the world's first fireproof building. Only 6 weeks after the fire, hundreds of stone and brick buildings were already under construction in Chicago. The people of Chicago went to work, quickly rebuilding the city, vowing to make it even better than it was. By 1885, only 14 years after the Great Chicago Fire of 1871, the first American skyscraper, the 9-story home insurance building, was open to the public. That building hardly compares to other famous modern Chicago skyscrapers, such as the John Hancock Building, constructed in the 1960s. Standing 1,451 floors high, the Willis Tower, formerly known as the Sears Tower, is the tallest building in the United States. Look how it rises above all the other buildings in Chicago. Today, Chicago remains one of America's biggest and greatest cities. Remember, every day is a new adventure waiting to happen.